A Patriots Faith, Chapter 7. Carson woke screaming from a deep and frightful sleep. He was soaked with sweat, and his head pounded a dull, throbbing melody that made him almost nauseous. He reached down and grabbed at his right leg, which was gone, shredded by the IED that his truck ran over on that dirt road in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan. The ceiling rattled from the sound of helicopters flying over, sounds so loud they deafened him. Nurses and doctors hurried all around him, seemingly oblivious to his presence. He felt the hand upon his shoulder, shaking him gently. "Honey, honey," called Angela in a loud whisper. "It's okay, baby. You're home. You're home. I'm here with you." Carson woke up. Carson Lee opened his eyes, awake for real this time. The room was quiet, a pleasant breeze curling in through his open window, the moon shining on a beautiful Alaskan summer night. "It's just a dream, sweetheart," Angela declared. "It's okay," she promised, as she stroked his face gently with the back of her soft hand. "It's okay," Carson sighed a sigh of relief. His terror quieted. The dream came less frequently now, but was still always the same. He was lying in the hospital ward aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Persian Gulf. He wakes up after the surgery that took his leg in order to save his life. The terrifying moment when he realizes that his leg is gone plays over and over in his mind and manifests itself in this dream. Angela knows the drill. She knows that he will pull on his running shoes now and go off to hike the trail that leads up to the lookout spot where her husband rededicated his life to Christ months after he returned home. That was his spot, his place of peace and solitude. That was where he went to spend time alone with God. Angela knew the only thing she could do was to support him, to stand by him, and to give him his time and his space. She got out of bed with him, and as he put on his PT shorts and tied the laces on his running shoes, she boiled a thermos full of water and packed it in his day pack, along with his coffee press, a baggie of French roast, fresh ground coffee, and a couple granola bars. She also put a baggie of dry dog food and a bottle of water for Boaz, their German shepherd. Angela grabbed the handheld ham radio from its charging dock and put it in the pack as well. She handed the pack to him and kissed him goodbye as he walked toward the door. It was 03:30 and the sun was not even up yet. She knew he would not be back before lunchtime. In fact, many times in the course of this ritual, he would not return home until after dark. Angela felt at peace about it. She knew her husband was going to do business with the Lord, and she would never do anything to get in the way of that relationship. The window in the apartment above the barn was open too, and Paul Connor had heard the scream that Carson let out in his dream. He sat up at the desk in front of the window and watched quietly as his friend walked behind the barn toward the steep trail up into the mountains. He waited until Angela shut the lights off in the house before he himself went back to bed. He reached over into the nightstand and switched on his handheld ham radio, which sat in its charging dock there, and made sure it was tuned to the right channel. As Paul rolled over in bed, Katie, half awake, asked, "Everything okay, baby?" Paul kissed her cheek and replied, "Yeah, honey, all good. Go back to sleep, sweetie." She smiled and drifted off in seconds. Carson was still away at 2 p.m. when Ken Fowler drove up the driveway in his pickup truck. Pastor Scanlon riding shotgun. Paul was out working in the garden and walked out to greet them. "Morning, Pastor. Ken," he said, as the truck pulled up to him with the window open. Pastor Scanlon replied, "Good morning, Paul." And Ken nodded and said, "Paul, how's it going?" Paul announced, "Carson isn't here at the moment. Was he expecting you guys?" He was pretty sure that he was not expecting them. Ken Fowler answered, "No, but we do need to speak with you both. Will he be back anytime soon?" Paul hesitated and said, "I expect him back sometime this afternoon. Not really sure when." Ken Fowler exchanged a concerned look with Jim Scanlon. "Is it something I can help you gentlemen with?" Paul asked. "Well, we need to speak to you both, but for time's sake, I'd like to do it once," Ken answered. Paul nodded. "Hang on. Let me see if I can raise him on the radio." He looked up onto the porch and inside the front door, where Angela and Katie were standing. Angela nodded and turned to go get the radio. "KV1S9, Liberty Ridge Base for Mobile 1, copy." A short pause followed. "Mobile 1, copy Liberty Ridge." "What's up, Buttercup?" came the response. By this time, Angela was on the porch, where the med had joined her. She handed the radio off to Paul. "Mobile 1, we got a non-emergency situation. Can you advise of ETA?" Carson came back. "Yes, Liberty Ridge. I can double time it back. ETA 20 minutes. "Roger that, Mobile 1. Don't break your neck. Say again, non-emergency." "Roger that, Liberty Ridge. I'm on the move now." "Roger," Paul answered. Angela offered her guests a cold drink, and Pastor Scanlon answered back, "Angela, is it too much trouble to make me a cup of that French roast coffee Carson loves to drink?" Angela smiled. "No, not at all, Pastor. Coming right up." Then she looked over at Ken. He shook his head and said, "Coffee sounds good. Thank you, ma'am." "Not at all. Please, call me Angela." Ken managed a smile and nodded. The men were sipping their coffee when Carson Lee came around from the back of the barn where the trail comes off the mountain, led by his German shepherd, Boaz. Angela saw him coming and brought him out a bottle of cold water and a towel. Ken Fowler shook his hand and said, "Men, I'm sorry to barge in unannounced like this, but I need to go over something with you both right away if you can spare a little time." Carson and Paul nodded simultaneously. Ken looked over at Pastor Scanlon, who asked, "Can you boys take a ride with us?" Carson looked over at Paul, who nodded to him. Carson turned to Ken and said, "Sure, give me 5 minutes to change," and he went inside. Angela followed him up to the bedroom. She asked him what was going on. He told her he didn't know, but that he didn't anticipate them being gone long. He gave her a kiss and went back downstairs. Paul was clipping his Glock 19 under his belt and pulling his shirt over it. He slid 2 extra magazines into the leather pouches attached to his belt and joined Carson at the bottom of the stairs. He told Katie, "Be back shortly, honey." When they walked outside, Ken and Pastor Scanlon were in the pickup with the motor running. Carson and Paul got into the rear seat of the crew cab, and Ken started down the driveway. They drove up further into the mountains before turning into a dirt access road. Ken announced, "This leads up to the backside of my property. I have a couple buildings there, as well as a pavilion that overlooks the peninsula." Carson and Paul exchanged a glance, and somewhat bewildered, Carson asked, "What exactly is going on, Ken? Why are we coming up here?" It seemed pretty important when I got the radio call. Ken just sighed. Pastor Scanlon spoke. "Gentlemen, the group meets up here sometimes and actually has a base for some of our operations up here as well. And then Ken said, I know you guys are interested in membership. I also know that it's still early in that process. I spoke at length with Pastor Scanlon and other members of our recruiting committee. We normally would take time to bring new potential members forward. However, because of issues that we plan to make clear today, we are fast-tracking that process with the two of you. As they pulled up to the gravel parking area on top of the mountain, Ken slipped the truck into park and turned to look at Carson and Paul directly. We can move forward on that track from our end, but we need a commitment from you both before we do. I'm going to break protocol slightly and share a few things with you today. There's much more that I won't say until after you've made that commitment, if you choose to do so. Let's go out and enjoy this beautiful summer day on the mountain. A blessing from our Father in heaven. Amen, said Pastor Scanlon, as the four men got out of the truck and proceeded up to the pavilion. Once seated in Adirondack chairs facing out into the valley and far beyond, Carson Lee couldn't help think to himself that this truly was $1 million view. Ken picked up his cell phone and punched a few buttons, sending out a short text. Minutes later, a young man in his early 20s came out from one of the buildings with a carafe of steaming hot coffee and 4 mugs. He set them down on a table behind Ken, and Ken nodded at him. Thanks, Brian. The young man nodded back and walked back up to the building from which he came. Help yourself to coffee, gentlemen, Ken announced. It's fresh. Then he looked over at Carson and Paul and continued. So, this is new territory for us, as we usually take our time with potential new members, as I've already stated. However, for reasons, some of which I'm going to share with you now, we need to not waste any time. You have a couple of options. One, you can continue on the slow, prudent track and decide at some later point to either join or walk away. Or, 2, you can fast-track the process on your end, as we have done on ours. If you choose that route, I'm going to need a firm commitment, sooner rather than later. There are so many pieces on this chessboard moving rapidly now, and until I get that commitment, there is much I cannot say. But let me start with what I can say. Ken paused and then pointed out into the vast expanse of wilderness before them. See down there, way off in the distance? You can barely make out part of the peninsula. That is the Kenai Peninsula, and beyond it, straight to the south and west, is the Pacific Ocean and the west coast of mainland United States lower 48. You have no doubt heard or saw in the news what's happening in Portland, Seattle, and even across the United States, all the way to the East Coast. This nation is under attack. An attack from socialist and communist factions within our borders. These subversive terrorist groups that threaten us are domestic in nature, and as such present a new and unique threat to the American way of life that we all knew and grew up in. I'm going to skip over the political speech because I believe we're all in unity on that respect. Carson, as a United States Senator with an 11-year track record of solid core conservative posturing, and Paul, as his top aide and security chief, it's almost a given, your political affiliations. Then, of course, we thoroughly vetted you both and know completely who you both are individually. We wouldn't be sitting here together today if the fruits of that process were any different. So, with that said, we want you with us. Most of the group members you met with knew it after your initial 2 meetings. Those group members make up our recruitment and membership council or committee. Of course, in an ideal situation, we would give you ample time to grow into us before we propose membership. being as you have not had the advantage of a prior extensive vetting procedure. Ken smiled. I guess what I'm saying is it's easier for us to move forward because at our first meeting, we all knew who you both were, and an advantage that you did not have. We have a network of groups and individuals across the nation that are associated with our group here in southern Alaska. Some of those groups and individuals are fully committed to that association, and some are more loosely committed to it. We have within our group a structure of command and assets spread widely throughout the country. Paul's eyes widened as he heard this. He looked at Carson, who worked hard not to show surprise at the notion that this group was possibly much more broad in its scope than either had earlier anticipated. Ken continued, Now, most of the details of those associations will not be laid out today, and certain ones will never be known to the membership at large. We work hard to compartmentalize operations for reasons that I believe should be obvious to you both. Paul and Carson nodded simultaneously. Okay, Ken said, I'm going to toe right up to the line here, without crossing it if I can. We had assets watching things unfold in the Pacific Northwest, as we do all over the country. When things started to heat up there, we shifted additional assets to help monitor and attempt to control and de-escalate things as possible. In the course of that, we had a small faction of operators in Portland when the courthouse got firebombed by leftist extremists. 3 of our men were killed trying to help secure the safety of 4 police officers who got isolated from their unit and attacked in the street. Our men felt they had no choice at that point but to intervene. Either that or stand by and watch those officers get beat and most likely murdered. For the record, they acted exactly how they were expected by our leadership to act. We advocate the use of deadly force only in the event of the threat of injury or death to ourselves or innocents. Again, they followed protocol and intervened as called for. In my opinion, and in the official posture of this group, they are considered American patriot heroes. Ken paused briefly as he attempted to control his emotions before continuing. One of those patriots was our regional security chief, and another was his lieutenant. Their loss left a very wide gap in our command structure, a gap that must be filled immediately. This threat is not going away. In fact, our intel shows it's ramping up considerably. That's about as far as I can go for now. You both are pretty sharp men. I think you can read between the lines here. I would love to have a commitment from you to join us. In fact, if, as I outlined earlier, you choose to fast-track your membership, I will ask that you make that commitment by no later than this evening. I'm flying down to Seattle first thing in the morning. Decisions must be made by us tomorrow, and how you boys play into that needs to be determined. Again, if you choose to move forward as initially prescribed, I understand that and will accept it. However, this is a crucial time for this group, as well as for this nation. Things are happening quickly, and we also must move quickly. Gentlemen, take the afternoon to discuss this among yourselves, and with your wives if necessary. We would love to have you on board. Then Pastor Scanlon spoke. Thanks, Ken. Let me also add that it's a little more dire than that, boys. He looked over at Ken, who looked down, and then he looked back at Paul and Carson. Ken isn't a man to wear his heart on his sleeve. I believe that's a quality that lends itself well to leadership. Having you boys join us would be good for the group. And, as Ken said, we would love to have you. He paused a moment. Gentlemen, we need to have you with us. We have an election coming up in 4 months. The survival of this nation rides on the outcome of that election. Then he stared directly at Carson. Son, you need to be on that chessboard. You bring something to the table that literally no other man can. Yes, we'd love to have you. But more than that, we need to have you. He looked back over at Ken, who managed to nod, and looked back over at Carson and Paul. No pressure, though, guys. The four men chuckled subduedly together, breaking the seriousness of the moment. To be continued.